Deeper droughts, fiercer floods, scientists raising the climate alarm as Trump prepares to retake the presidency.
It is clear that the next administration will try to take a U-turn and reverse much of this progress.
Today, a look at how a warming world could change the Bay Area and how a Berkeley student is providing some hope out of thin air.
I looked at Zihui and I said, you have solved society's most pressing problem.
This is CBS News Bay Area with Elizabeth Cook.
I'm Ann Makovec in for Liz, and the future of our climate is in our hands right now. But many fear it's going to head in the wrong direction when former President Trump is back in the White House. Today, we're looking at some of the potential consequences if we don't stop the bleeding, and how a Bay Area student is proving we can all make a difference to protect our planet. More powerful storms and more severe droughts could be our new normal if nothing is done to combat climate change. And that is why leaders from more than 200 countries are in Azerbaijan for the final day of the United Nations 29th Climate Change Conference, also known as COP29. Most nations, including the U.S., failed to deliver on last year's promise to phase out coal, oil, and gas. In fact, the U.S. is producing more oil than any other country. U.S. officials raise concerns that the incoming Trump administration could ramp things up even further. But they add it's not going to stop them from continuing to advocate for clean energy policies.
It is clear that the next administration will try to take a U-turn and reverse much of this progress. The work to contain climate change is going to continue in the United States with commitment and passion and belief.
Meanwhile, climate finance is the driving force at this year's conference, with the UN saying that richer nations might need to shell out at least $1 trillion a year to try to help developing countries combat and cope with climate change. And Darren Peck back to give us a little bit of history about this organization and the flop that we've made on the goals so far.
Yeah. We're not doing good.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of talk now that President Donald Trump is coming back, and his whole claim is that he's going to take us out of something known as the Paris Accord, the agreement. That was COP21. So we're in COP29 right now in Azerbaijan. In 2015, this entire group, Conference of the Parties, that's what COP stands for. This is the 29th year they've done it. On the 21st year they did it, it was in Paris, and that is where the Paris Accord was signed. It was the most substantial meeting that we'd had as a group. And there was a lot of optimism, and there was a lofty goal set in that year, which was, if we want to avoid the worst of this, we want to keep the global temperature from rising more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above where we were in the pre-industrial age, before 1900. We're at like 1.3 now.
Yeah.
They want to keep us from going over 1.5. A little perspective on.
Is that feasible?
The short answer is probably not. But we're going to have some good news on this, because even if we go past 1.5, this isn't over for us. We're going to fill in this story throughout the rest of this half hour, and we aren't going to finish this on a positive note. In terms of where we stand now, even if we get pulled out of the Paris Accord, ideally we don't want to do that, but if it's inevitable, we're going to try and give some clarity to why that does not end this endeavor. First of all, 1.5 degrees Celsius sounds like a very small number, and you would think, how could 1.5 degrees have a huge impact on life on the planet? Well, we're talking about the global temperature as a whole. So for a little perspective, the average temperature for Earth as a whole is 15 degrees Celsius. If you take the Arctic, take the tropics, take San Francisco, take Minnesota, take Siberia, all of it. Put it all together, you get an average day, night, winter, summer, average it all out, 15 degrees Celsius. And I know here in America we like Fahrenheit, 59 degrees Fahrenheit. But this is a global issue. So we've all got to be on the same page. 15 degrees is the average temperature. If you budge that by 1.5 degrees, now that's a lot. And for perspective, when we went into the last ice age and there was 2,000 feet of ice over what is now New York City, we had cooled that, well, we hadn't, but the global climate itself had cooled by a mere 5 degrees. We were 5 degrees below what the pre-industrial average is, and that brought 2,000 feet of ice to New York. So at 1.5, what we're experiencing now is already notable. Here's a little perspective on this goal. Let's come over here, and what you're seeing is a graph that shows how average global temperatures have gone up, going all the way back to 1970 there at the end. In 2014, when the Paris Accord was signed, we had until 2042, at that current rate of warming with carbon we were putting into the atmosphere, it would have taken until 2042 at that pace to get to 1.5, and it seemed realistic. Here's where we are now. We really haven't done much work on this as a global community in terms of reducing the amount of carbon we're putting into the atmosphere. We've stopped increasing it, almost, but it's still going up a little. We haven't leveled this off just yet. And now the realistic mark on here, from 2024, realistically, we get to 1.5 degrees above average by the year 2030, which means we're probably going past that, and by a sizable margin. And then that starts to bring in all other kinds of concerns for what we mentioned at the top of this newscast, which is the hallmark for California: wider swings, whether it's deeper droughts or bigger floods. That's kind of the simplified takeaway on our experience of this. We could do a whole show on what 2 degrees means for California, and maybe we will one day. But for right now, we're just giving you the basics on where we stand. So stick around for the rest of the show, because as dire as that sounds, there is good news, and we're going to bring in some experts, and they're going to shed a little light on that for us as well. For now, Ann, back to you.
All right, thank you, Darren. Still ahead, President-elect Trump is expected to make an about-face when it comes to climate policy, why experts are saying it is not the end of the world. Well, President Biden made history earlier this week by becoming the first president to visit the Amazon rainforest. He took an aerial tour of the region and met with indigenous leaders, and he spoke on his administration's efforts to push climate policy, adding that he is hoping that President-elect Trump follows his lead after he takes office.
It's no secret that I'm leaving office in January. I will leave my successor and my country in a strong foundation to build on if they choose to do so. It's true, some may seek to deny or delay the clean energy revolution that's underway in America. But nobody can reverse it.
In 2015, as President Trump made the historic decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement that Darren's been telling us about. Darren?
Okay, so in light of where we know we're going with leadership in this country, there has to be a certain amount of anxiety among people who care deeply about this topic. If we get pulled out of that big international agreement that was signed in Paris for COP21 almost 10 years ago, what does that mean? And aren't we already in a big enough hole already? So in order to shed some light on that, what is a very complicated topic, we're going to go to the expert, somebody who was actually there. Professor Dr. David Victor from UCSD. Tell me the name of the program again. You've got a wonderful title. It says something about innovation and finding the way forward. Give me a little introduction on yourself.
Sure. I'm a professor of innovation and public policy. I study how changes in technology lead to big changes in politics, and I do a lot of work on climate change.
And I wanted to talk to you because you were there in 2015. You took part in those meetings where this very ambitious goal was set. So you know a little bit about what went into that idea, how we came up with that number. And you've also got some really interesting perspective. I know it was enlightening for me on why, while we'd like to hit 1.5, even if it looks like we're not going to, we shouldn't necessarily despair too much. So share a little of your insight on that with us.
Sure, absolutely. I was there in Paris. It's a good agreement. It's a flexible agreement. It lets every country figure out what it wants to do to contribute to the climate change problem. But the key thing is that every country's involved. And so it creates a legitimacy around the overall effort and has this goal in the middle of it that says we're going to stop warming at well below 2 degrees. And for a lot of climate scientists, that means 1.5 degrees, because there's growing evidence that a lot of bad things happen to the climate at 1.5 degrees.
Okay, so the incoming president is likely going to repeat what he did last time, which is to pull us out of that agreement and say, yeah, that doesn't matter. We're not going to take part in that. And I think a lot of people hear that and go, well, we're such a major player in this. How significant is that? And how concerning is it if we do get pulled out of this meeting?
Yeah, it's significant because it's a signal to the rest of the world. The U.S. is the second largest emitter. We're often the world leader on a lot of different topics. But we need to keep some perspective. The rest of the world is going to respond. So the United States is going to leave. It's quite likely that Trump is actually going to leave on the first day of his presidency. That's what is faster than the last time. But then other countries are going to respond. They're going to say we are in, and they're going to double down. California is going to respond. We've already announced a special session of the legislature to deal with a whole range of issues that are kind of anti-Trump issues. And so to me, what's really interesting is this revolution in clean energy is underway, and it frankly doesn't matter who's in the White House.
Wow. Wow. So there is so much momentum within industry at this point that will push us forward, regardless of what an ideological lean is in government in this country. The awareness within industry, those responsible for putting carbon into the atmosphere and those responsible for finding ways to get it out, will likely have a bigger say going forward than what the policy may be. Am I kind of summarizing that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's right. There's also a huge amount of inertia. So we are going to blow through 1.5 degrees. We're probably going to blow through 2 degrees. But the right way to measure progress here is, what's our trajectory? 15 years ago, the world was on track for 5 degrees Celsius of warming, a huge amount of climate change, catastrophic impacts. Now we're on track for maybe 2.5 degrees of warming.
Yes,
so
yes.
That's not 0.
Yep.
It's not 1.5, but it's not
right.
5.
That's such a complicated part of this story, too. And those of us who are deep in the weeds on this story can look at that and go, man, we really thought this was going to be way worse, like 5-10 years ago. We have made progress. So there's reason to be, at least, to feel somewhat good about that. But we know what 2 degrees means. Granted, it's not 4, but we know what 2 degrees means, and that's a big enough concern. We've got a story coming up from work being done here at UC Berkeley in a moment in this newscast, where they are going to share a way they found to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And that's a little more uplifting as well, and I know you've got some colleagues there. But we're out of time, Dr. Victor, so I've got to say goodbye to you for now. Thank you so much for making the time. I know you had a busy day and you were traveling. Thanks for getting here with us today.
Thank you, Darren.
A grad student at UC Berkeley has created an innovative way to pluck a planet-warming gas right out of the air. Sarah Donchi shows us how it works.
The drenching rains, record-breaking heat, as well as more severe floods and droughts. Extreme weather events have become more frequent and intense as CO2 levels surge, further warming the planet. Even if the world immediately stops using fossil fuels, experts warn hundreds of billions of tons of CO2 will remain in the air, causing further damage. The goal? To bring the gas down to pre-industrial levels. Now, this bright yellow powder, invented at the University of California at Berkeley, may be the game changer.
The CO2 concentration directly dropped down to 0.
Just a half a pound of it removes as much carbon dioxide from the air as a full-grown tree.
I was very excited.
Meet Ziwei Zhou, a fourth-year graduate student in the Department of Chemistry. Ziwei does research in the Yagi lab, named after the pioneering chemist Omar Yagi.
And I looked at Ziwei and I said, you have solved society's most pressing problem.
10 years ago, Professor Yagi created a material that could suck water out of desert air. Now, thanks to Ziwei, the lab has now designed a material that quickly sucks carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, a daunting challenge.
It's a monumental problem to take it out of the air because it's mixed with other gases and is dilute, although harmful, but dilute. And that makes it even a supremely harder problem.
Seen microscopically, the material is known as a covalent organic framework, or COF for short.
We have a column here, and it's like a straw.
Ziwei tested the compound in a special device, packing the powder into a straw-like cylinder to filter the air. The student first pumped in a mix of gases to simulate air.
We mixed all the cylinders, including nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide.
But he also tested it on real air, pumped in from just outside the lab.
The tube is located just outside the balcony.
In hundreds of cycles.
And it was a beautiful result. The air was completely cleansed of CO2, and it was doing it repeatedly.
After the filter is full, the gas can be removed and stored, and the filter used again. The next step to deploy it on an industrial scale. The hope that capturing carbon will make us all breathe a little easier.
Thanks for watching. You can always get all the latest headlines and weather over on Pix Plus. And remember to like and click the button on the bottom left of your screen to subscribe for the biggest Bay Area news.